I always thought I was pretty good at navigating awkward family dynamics. I'd had enough practice over the years. Divorces, new step-parents, blended holidays, but nothing prepared me for living under the same roof as Mason. He moved in 2 summers ago when our parents got married. My mom and his dad had met on a cruise, and after a whirlwind romance and a backyard wedding, they decided to merge households. That meant Mason and I, 2 20-something guys who barely knew each other, were now stepbrothers. From day one, we didn't click. Mason was the athletic, extroverted, always has someone texting him type. I was quieter, more into books, video games, and working remotely from my laptop. We didn't fight exactly, but we never hung out either. Every conversation felt like small talk that never led anywhere. And then, last week happened. It was supposed to be a chill weekend. Our parents were out of town, and I was looking forward to having the house to myself. Just some peace and quiet. No Mason, except he showed up unexpectedly late Friday night, tossing his duffel bag on the couch like he owned the place. "Thought you were staying at your friend's?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Plans changed," he mumbled without looking at me. Then he disappeared into his room and didn't say another word to me all night. Okay, weird. The next day, it got worse. He barely spoke to me, avoided eye contact, and gave short, clipped answers when I asked him basic stuff like if he wanted to order food or if he was using the shower next. At one point, I even asked, "Are you mad at me or something?" He just shrugged and muttered, "Forget it," before walking out the back door. By Sunday night, I was over it. I holed up in my room with a drink, trying to forget how tense the weekend had been. Whatever it was, I figured he'd get over it, or at least go back to ignoring me like usual. I didn't expect him to show up in my doorway at 1 a.m. I was half asleep, one earbud still in, when I heard the creak of my door. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I saw his silhouette standing there in the dim glow from the hallway. "Mason?" I said, sitting up slightly. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, hands in the pockets of his hoodie, looking at the floor. "I can't sleep," he finally said, voice low. "Okay?" "I don't know. He hesitated. "Can I crash here for a bit?" I blinked. "In my room?" He nodded. I don't want to be alone right now." I wasn't sure what to say. We weren't close. He'd barely looked at me all weekend. But something in his voice made me pause. There was this weird vulnerability there, like he was trying hard not to say whatever was really going on. "Yeah," I said slowly, shifting to make space. "You can stay, I guess." He didn't say thank you. Just closed the door quietly behind him, kicked off his slides, and pulled off his hoodie. He was shirtless underneath, wearing just a pair of basketball shorts. He climbed into the other side of the bed without a word. I lay there frozen, unsure if I was supposed to say something else or just pretend this was normal. I could feel the warmth of his body, just inches away. The room was quiet except for our breathing. He turned onto his side, facing away from me. After a minute, he said quietly, "You really don't know why I was mad?" "No," I whispered. He didn't respond right away. Then, "You said something a few weeks ago. You probably don't remember." "What did I say?" There was a pause, and then he said something I wasn't ready for. "You said you would never date a guy like me." My stomach dropped. My mind raced. I had said something like that, joking around with a friend on speakerphone, when Mason had walked into the kitchen unexpectedly. "I didn't mean it like that," I said quickly. "I didn't even know you heard me." "I heard you," he muttered. The silence that followed was so loud it hurt. I wanted to fix it, to explain. But before I could open my mouth again, I felt him shift closer behind me. The mattress dipped slightly. His knee brushed mine under the blanket. Then, without a word, he slid his arm around my waist. At first, I froze. Mason's arm wrapped around my waist, resting there gently. No pressure, no tug, just contact, warm and real, and definitely not an accident. I stayed perfectly still, my heart thudding so loud I was sure he could hear it. We weren't touchy. We didn't hug. Hell, we barely made eye contact most days. and now he was curled up behind me in my bed after being silent and weird for 2 straight days. And he had definitely just admitted to hearing me say something that had obviously stuck with him. "You're not saying anything," he murmured behind me. "I don't know what to say," I whispered back. "You said you'd never date with a guy like me." His voice was quieter now. "And maybe that's true, but I couldn't stop thinking about it." He paused. I didn't move. "Thinking about why it bothered me so much," he added. I turned my head slightly to look at him over my shoulder. In the dim light, I could just make out the shape of his face. Serious, eyes lowered. He wasn't playing. He wasn't teasing. He was hurt. "I didn't mean it like that," I said again, softer this time. "I wasn't trying to insult you. It was just, I was deflecting, making a joke. Because the idea of being with me is that funny?" "No," I sighed. "Because the idea of wanting to be with you scared the hell out of me." He blinked, lips parting slightly. I could see the shift in his expression even in the shadows. "You're serious?" I nodded. "I thought you hated me." "I didn't hate you," he said. "I just didn't know how to act around you. You were always so calm, quiet, in control." I laughed quietly. "That's just because I didn't know what the hell to do with you. You're like everything I'm not." He smiled faintly, then let his head rest near the back of my shoulder, forehead brushing me gently. The moment stretched, weirdly calm now, like we were on the edge of something fragile. His hand was still on my waist. He hadn't moved it. I could feel his breathing slow, feel the way his body started to soften behind mine, like something in him had finally let go. Then, barely audible, "I'm sorry I was being a dumb this weekend." "You weren't," I replied. "You were just mad. I get it." Another beat passed. Then I felt him move again, not away, but closer. His chest pressed against my back now. His arm tightened slightly, not possessive, just steady. "You okay with this?" he asked, voice low. "I don't know what this is." "Me neither," he said, "but I don't want to go back to acting like we're just roommates who happen to share a mom and a dad." I swallowed. "Me either." Silence again. A long one. And then, I felt his nose graze the side of my neck. Just a brush. Soft. Barely even a touch. But I didn't pull away. "Can I stay here tonight?" he whispered. I nodded. And this time, when he pulled me closer, I didn't stop him. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of anything dramatic. There was no kissing, no wild moment where everything tipped over into something physical. But the way Mason held me, it was more intimate than anything I'd felt in years. At some point, he dozed off, his breathing slowing against the back of my neck. But I just lay there, wide-eyed in the dark, trying to make sense of everything. This was Mason, my stepbrother, the guy who barely said more than 5 words to me in a day. And now here he was, asleep in my bed, his arms snug around my waist, like it had always belonged there. It was both surreal and strangely peaceful. I kept expecting him to wake up, freak out, pull away. But he didn't. He stayed curled against me the entire night. When morning finally came, the light creeping through the edges of the blinds, I shifted slightly and felt his grip tighten instinctively. "You awake?" I whispered. He gave a soft grunt. I felt him press his forehead lightly against my shoulder like he wasn't ready to face the day yet. "I didn't dream all that, right?" I asked. His voice was groggy. "What part?" "You coming into my room, saying what you said, holding me like this." A pause. "No, you didn't dream it." We lay there in silence again, but it was less heavy now. Something had changed. Eventually, I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my face. Mason didn't move at first. Then he slowly rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he said. I looked over at him. His hair was a mess and the sheet was halfway down his chest. He looked exhausted, but honest. "Thinking about what?" I asked. You, he said simply. I didn't know how to bring it up without making it weird, I snorted. Well, crawling into my bed in the middle of the night was a bold strategy. He cracked a small smile. Worked though, didn't it? I threw a pillow at him, and he caught it without flinching. I just didn't want you to hate me, he added, voice a little quieter. I don't hate you, Mason, I said. I was just confused. I thought you were straight. You never gave any sign. I didn't know how to, he interrupted. Everything's always been black and white for me. But then you moved in and He stopped, shook his head. I don't know. You made everything feel complicated. That's fair, I admitted. He sat up, leaning on one arm to face me. So what now? We just pretend that didn't happen? I met his eyes. Do you want to pretend it didn't happen? No, he said immediately. Not even a little. I looked down at my hands for a moment, then back at him. Then we figure it out, slowly. He nodded. Slow's good. We both sat there, quiet, still processing. But this time, the silence wasn't full of tension. It was full of potential. He reached over and touched my hand. Not holding it, just resting his fingers against mine. A small contact. A start. And then he said something I wasn't expecting. Want to go make waffles? I blinked. Waffles? Yeah, I feel like waffles. And I'm gonna make them for you. As a peace offering. I smiled. I'm not saying no to waffles. He stood up, stretched, and padded toward the door in nothing but his shorts. Completely casual like this was just a normal morning between two normal guys. Which it wasn't. Not really. But maybe that was okay. Just before he left the room, he paused. Hey, he said, glancing back at me. Thanks for not pushing me away last night. I just nodded. Thanks for showing up. And with that, he disappeared down the hall. I sat there in bed for another minute, the sheets still warm where he'd been, and for the first time in a while, I didn't feel alone in that house. The smell of waffles drifted down the hall before I even made it to the kitchen. Mason was at the stove in his usual low-slung shorts, shirtless, humming quietly to himself. The morning light was hitting him just right, back muscles flexing slightly with each movement. Hair still messy from sleep. I stood in the doorway, quietly watching him for a second before saying, "Didn't know you could cook." He glanced over his shoulder with a smirk. Waffles don't count as cooking. They're like edible Legos. I chuckled and walked over to the counter, grabbing a mug and pouring myself coffee. Still, pretty sure this is the first time I've seen you do anything domestic. He shrugged. You caught me. I'm secretly a housewife at heart. The banter felt easy, which surprised me. I thought after last night we'd both wake up awkward, full of second-guessing and weird silences. But Mason, he seemed relaxed. Maybe even more relaxed than he'd ever been around me. He slid a waffle onto a plate and handed it over. Here, eat. Let's not make this whole emotional bonding thing a hungry one. I took the plate and sat at the kitchen table. He made his own and joined me a second later, the two of us eating in a surprisingly calm silence. Until he spoke again. Hey, about last night. I looked up, bracing for the shift. I meant what I said, he continued, voice more serious now. About thinking about it, about you. I swallowed a bite. Me too. I just never thought you felt that way. He toyed with his fork, then looked up at me. I didn't think I did. Not like that. Not until I started noticing shit that shouldn't have mattered. Like the way you'd walk around in that gray hoodie and those dumb sweatpants that somehow still made your ass look. Okay. I cut him off, laughing. You do not get to sexualize my sad loungewear. Too late, he grinned. But the grin faded a little, and his gaze softened. I don't want this to just be some one-time thing, some curiosity phase. I met his eyes. It's not. Okay, he said, relief flooding his face for a second. Good. We finished breakfast without diving too deep after that. He told me a few dumb stories from work, asked me about the book I'd been reading. It was normal, and yet not. It was like we were still figuring out how to be around each other now that everything had shifted slightly off axis. Later that afternoon, I found myself alone in the living room, scrolling on my phone when Mason came out of his room with a blanket and flopped down next to me on the couch. "I'm cold," he said, tossing the blanket over both of us like it was the most normal thing in the world. "You could have worn a shirt," I muttered, adjusting to give us more room. He leaned into me instead. "Nah, this is better." I didn't say anything, just let him stay there, his body warm against mine. We sat like that for a long time, close, quiet, and not needing to explain it. At some point, he shifted again, this time resting his head on my shoulder. "You think our parents would freak out?" he asked suddenly. The question hit like a flash of cold water. I hesitated. "Honestly, probably," he sighed. "Yeah, figured." I felt his fingers curl into the edge of the blanket, gripping it lightly. "I don't want to hide it," he said. "I know," I replied. "But maybe let's just figure out what this is first. You and me. Before we bring anyone else into it." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's smart." Another pause, then he added, "Just so you know, I'm not going anywhere." I glanced down at him, head on my shoulder, one arm still loosely resting across my thigh. "Good," I said, "because I don't want you to." That afternoon drifted by in this strange, lazy haze. We didn't leave the couch for hours. The TV played in the background, some movie we weren't even watching, and the blanket stayed draped over us like some quiet agreement. It was the first time Mason had touched me without tension in the air, without any sarcasm behind it. He just wanted to be close. Eventually, I reached over and ran my fingers lightly through his hair. He didn't say anything, just let out a slow breath and leaned in closer. I think that's when I realized this wasn't about lust or confusion or figuring out what label to slap on it. It was about trust. And whatever was happening between us, it was happening slowly, quietly, on our terms. Late in the evening, we finally peeled ourselves off the couch to make dinner. We ended up throwing together something dumb, pasta with jarred sauce and too much garlic. But it felt like a ritual, a new one. We were standing at the stove, shoulder to shoulder, when Mason looked over at me and said, "I used to think you hated me." I blinked. "What?" "When we first moved in together, you barely talked. You always had your door closed. I figured you wanted nothing to do with me." I shook my head. "I didn't hate you. I just didn't know what to say. You were like this jockey guy who always had his friends over, and I felt like I didn't belong in my own house." Mason frowned. "You never told me that." "Yeah, well, I didn't want to sound like I was whining." He went quiet for a second, stirring the sauce aimlessly. Then he said, "Maybe we were both waiting for the other person to figure it out." I looked at him. Guess we finally did. After dinner, we played video games in the living room. He beat me in 2 rounds of FIFA, then I destroyed him in Mario Kart, and we ended up wrestling over the controller until the blanket from earlier fell off the couch, and one of us landed halfway across the floor. We were laughing, breathless, limbs tangled when the laughter suddenly faded. He was lying half on top of me, his chest against mine, faces inches apart. Neither of us moved. Mason's expression shifted. Softer now, more serious. Like he was looking for permission, so I gave it. I leaned up, just a little, and he met me halfway. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't heated or desperate. It was slow, tentative, like we were both still learning what this was supposed to feel like. His lips were warm, and the kiss lingered just long enough to make my heart thud hard in my chest. When we pulled apart, he looked at me like he wasn't sure if he'd gone too far. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah." "You?" He smiled, small and real. "Yeah." We didn't say anything else after that. We didn't need to. We just laid there on the living room floor, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since our parents got married, the house actually felt like home. The next morning came too fast. I woke up on the couch with Mason still half on top of me, his hand resting lazily on my stomach. The TV had gone black hours ago, The blanket was somewhere on the floor, and the living room was filled with early light pouring through the windows. I didn't want to move. He was still asleep, breathing slow and steady, face buried slightly into my chest like he'd been there 100 times before. But something about the light, the silence, the reality of morning made everything feel more real and more complicated. I shifted slightly, not to wake him, just to get a better look at him. Mason. My stepbrother. Somehow, still the same person, and somehow not. Everything between us had changed, and yet, when I looked at him now, it didn't feel wrong, just new. Like I was seeing a version of him that had always been there but hidden behind walls and sarcasm. He stirred a little, then opened one eye groggily. "Mornin'," he mumbled, voice thick with sleep. "Hey," I said softly. "You drooled on me." He blinked, lifted his head, and smirked. That's how you know it was a good night. I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. "Wanna get up?" "Nope," he said, dropping his head back down onto my chest. I let my fingers drift through his hair again, slow and absent-minded. After a while, he spoke. "So what are we doing?" I paused. "Right now or in general?" "In general." I took a breath. "I don't know. I guess we figure it out, see where this goes." Mason nodded against my chest. "I just don't want it to be a one-time thing. I don't want you to think I'm playing." "I don't," I said. Last night wasn't just a moment. It felt like more. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod and squeezed my waist a little tighter. A few hours later, the spell broke, not between us, but in the form of reality slapping us in the face. We were in the kitchen, throwing together a lazy breakfast, when we heard the front door unlock. Our parents. They weren't supposed to be home until that evening, but there they were, bags in hand, sunglasses still on. Surprised expressions frozen as they walked into the kitchen and saw Mason shirtless, me in pajama pants, both of us clearly having just woken up. Mason's dad raised an eyebrow. "Morning?" my mom offered hesitantly. Mason and I looked at each other for a beat. "Hey," he said casually, grabbing a glass of water. "We made waffles." I nearly choked, trying not to laugh. Our parents didn't say anything right away, just looked between us. No one called it out, no one asked questions. But I saw my mom's eyes flicker to where Mason's hand brushed mine when we passed each other the butter. Later, when we were alone in my room, I shut the door and leaned back against it. "Well," I said, "that went better than expected." "Think they know?" Mason asked, sitting on my bed, legs folded under him. "I think they suspect." He nodded slowly. "Think they'd freak out?" I hesitated. "I don't know, but they'll deal." He looked up at me. "You sure?" I crossed the room and sat next to him. "I'm not gonna lie about this. Not to them. And not to myself." He leaned in, resting his forehead against mine. "Okay," he said. The next few days felt like living in a strange in-between, where nothing was exactly said, but nothing was exactly hidden anymore either. Mason and I weren't doing anything wild. We weren't making out in the kitchen or sneaking around like teenagers. But we were closer. We sat on the same side of the couch. He leaned into me when we watched TV. His hand would casually brush my leg under the table. And we didn't flinch or hide it when our parents were around. To their credit, they didn't say anything at first. But then came the morning my mom caught us kissing in the garage. It wasn't even dramatic. We were going out to grab something from the freezer, and I turned to say something. He kissed me, and boom, there she was, arms full of laundry, eyebrows practically touching her hairline. Mason froze like he'd just been caught shoplifting. I panicked and said, "It's not what it looks like." She blinked. "It looks like you're kissing your stepbrother." I had no comeback for that. The silence hung for a moment too long before she just sighed, shook her head, and walked past us, muttering, "Don't get caught in the dryer." After she was gone, Mason turned to me, wide-eyed. "What the hell just happened?" I think that was permission? I said, half laughing, half dying inside. Later that night, my mom pulled me aside. She wasn't mad, just curious. She asked if I was okay, if I was happy, if I felt safe. When I said yes to all three, she nodded and said, "Then that's all that matters. Just be careful." Mason's dad didn't say anything to me directly, but I heard them talking later that night in the hallway. "You sure about this?" his dad asked. Mason's voice was steady. "I've never been more sure." There was a pause, then a quiet, resigned, "All right, kid." And that was it. No explosion, no rejection, no dramatic family fallout. Just awkward acceptance and a new, strange normal. Over the next couple weeks, things settled. We didn't push it. We didn't try to label anything. We just existed as stepbrothers, roommates, something more, whatever you wanted to call it. One night, we were lying in my bed again, something that had become a quiet routine, and Mason rolled onto his side to face me. "Can I ask you something kind of serious?" "Sure." "What if we weren't stepbrothers?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we just met in college or something? At a party, total strangers. You think we'd still be here right now?" I thought about it for a second. "Yeah, I do." He smiled softly. "Me too." Then he nudged me. "You'd have fallen for me way faster, though." "Oh, absolutely," I said sarcastically. "I'm a total sucker for emotionally distant jocks who steal the last waffle." He grinned. "You love it." I didn't answer that. I just leaned in and kissed him. Slow, familiar now. And when we finally pulled back, he whispered, "You're not getting rid of me? You know that, right?" I looked at him, my stepbrother, my best friend, my accidental everything, and I nodded. "Yeah," I said, "I know.